Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Game Developer Pete. I'm your host, Chris, and today we're going to be talking about a game that I didn't expect to like as much as I did, and that game is In Other Waters. I would say there is something to be said for the level design in this game. It is a very open kind of exploration looking game, but it is definitely, how do I explain this? It seems like it's designed in such a way where you could just wander around, but you kind of can't. You look at the game and you're like, oh, I can explore anywhere. But the controls on the game are like, no, you can go to these fixed points. You're essentially playing a series of nodes. You can just move from one node to the next, and you can kind of scan around you, see what's around you, and then move to another node, and so on. So the world feels bigger than it plays, if that makes sense. It's this cool little illusion that the developer has established where it feels like everything is so full because you're getting so much detail from the writing about these individual nodes that you're checking out and visiting, and I really appreciate that. I'll be playing it and I'll go, oh, there's stuff over there, there's stuff over here, and because it's kind of like a topographical map, you can tell that there's an outcrop here, there's a mountainous kind of underwater thing over there, and there's a lot of stuff that I walked away from and went, man, there's so much more in that game. I felt like there was a lot more to explore and find out about. And you can't really find out about all of it. You have to leave it in your mind. You have to kind of imagine it. You have to kind of accept that you're not going to get all the answers to this world. And I like the fact that there's actually not a visual representation of all these different creatures. I think there's probably a separate little art book thing that they've done, some kind of collaboration like that. I think I saw something on the Steam page about an additional thing you can buy. I didn't dig into it because I kind of like this idea of not having visuals to it, although I'm sure it's probably fantastic. So that's something that I really liked about it. Another thing that I really like about it is the way they play with color. There's not a lot of it, but when it happens, it's important. There's not that many different colors. It's very minimal in that way, but the different colors have a significant impact on the way you're playing the game. They're cool. I'm not going to go deeper into that really, but I like the impact that the color choices have. I'll just leave it at that. And then the next bit is the control scheme and the way that this game is communicated to the player. When I first entered the game, I was like, what? You're not really telling me exactly what to do. It looks a little confusing, whatever. And then I had to figure it out. I appreciate that so much. I am so happy to have to figure out the controls on something where it's it's showing you what you need to know. You can figure it out. But it's so nice to have a game look at me and go, yeah, you can figure this out, dude. You'll be fine. You know, you have a brain. You know how many buttons there are on the controller. Nothing's going to explode if you press the wrong button. You're not going to destroy anything. Just figure out the button presses. You've got this. And I'm like, oh, you know what? You're right. I've got this. I don't know why I need a text pop-up saying press A to jump. I can look and see that I need to the game does not have a jump function, for the record. I'm just, I can look, I can figure it out. So I appreciate that. And it doesn't I'd be interested to see whether or not this game is very accessible to people who don't play games much. My feeling is that it probably would be, but I don't know. I'm not that guy. I've been playing games so long. I'm so out of touch with that. I'd be interested to see somebody play this game who doesn't have a big background in gaming, because I want to know whether or not they would have trouble with the controls, whether or not it would make any sense, or if it would just end up turning into like a cool little easy relaxed experience, because it is mostly pretty slow paced. You can kind of take your time, especially at the beginning, to learn everything. All right, so that's how I'm feeling about it. Let's move on to the lessons I'm taking away from this game. As far as my own development process goes, I think In Other Waters is going to have an interesting, kind of like a weird impact. I think mostly it is an inspiration. I think mostly it's something where I look at it and I go, man, look at how much they accomplished within the limitations that they set for themselves. The game is pretty minimalistic. It relies a lot on the dialogue. It relies a lot on, I say dialogue, it relies a lot on the text. There's no voice acting or anything. It relies a lot on simple choices that are well made. It's not like a big difficulty spike game. It's very much an exploration. It's not like, it's not something where you play it and you go, oh my God, how did anybody ever, how could, and I, it's like, how could any group of people get together and make this? This is so insane. Like, you play some AAA games and you're like, well, I'll never make anything like that. Of course, you're not a AAA studio. You're one person or a small group of people. And then you look at some other games and you're like, wow, I have certain skills, but I don't have all these skills. I can't put all of this stuff together. And looking at the choices they made, it's like you can look at the skills you have. I'm talking to myself here mostly, but you can look at the skills you have and say, okay, this is what I can play off of. This is the strength I can build off of. And here's how I can use it to compensate for something that I may not have. Or maybe I'll pivot the game to be like, I don't really want to go in that direction because I don't have those skills. For instance, I'm not really going to mess with multiplayer stuff because I don't really have any of the like networking knowledge, and I'm not interested in learning it right now. But say you want to make something multiplayer and you don't want to do anything over the network and you can't afford to take the time to learn it, you make a couch co-op game, right? It's that kind of a thing where you can look at it and go, oh, I can work within these limitations. Like, I can decide which skills to lean into and I can really play to those strengths. And that's how I feel coming away from playing this game. I feel like I can play to my strengths. That's the big takeaway. How exactly that's going to play out, I don't know. You got to do a lot of experimentation and figure out what works and what doesn't. And, I'm sure there's like trying to overcompensate for one weakness with some strength when really you just have to shore up the weakness to a certain level. Like, I think it's easy to look at a game that has very minimalistic art and be like, oh, I don't need to worry about art. But if it's done really tastefully, they're still worrying about art. Like, they're definitely still putting a lot of thought into the art. It's just not as technically intense. It's a different angle. So anyway, there's going to be a lot of experimentation in my own process and figuring out what I am good at and what I'm not as good at, and what I can lean on and what I might need to like shore up my strengths on or hire somebody else for. I know this. So this game had, In Other Waters had incredible audio. They did hire a composer for this. I keep saying I'm pretty sure the studio is basically one guy. The credits have like additional coders listed, and then there's like the publishing stuff at the bottom. But it seems like it's mostly one guy, and then he hires somebody for all the audio, and it looked like a little bit of additional programming. I say that I don't actually have the inside scoop on that. For all I know, those additional programmers were putting in just as much effort and time as the main guy. But anyway, I don't want to speculate about all that. It doesn't actually it's not actually that important to this discussion. But the amount that you can accomplish with like a lean team, right? Like with a really small team, is impressive to me. And it's inspiring. What other takeaways? How we define gameplay is interesting, because I don't think this game has a lot of gameplay in the same way that a lot of like 40-hour games will have like one or two gameplay mechanics, and then they just like do the same thing for 40 hours and it's riding on the story. I think there's a lot of things that we don't define as gameplay that absolutely are gameplay, and I think exploration is gameplay. Or I say we, I mean me. I often don't think of things like exploration as gameplay, even though it is. I don't think of things as like reading text as gameplay, but it is. It's all part of the game. It's all part of the gameplay. But as far as strict gameplay mechanics, I think maybe they're just not as important as I think they are. I've been working on this project right now. I'm working on a little 2D platformer. And I'm in like an early, like I'm prototyping some stuff. And my feeling is always, how do I make this more interesting? How do I make the gameplay engaging, right? With the platformer, you're like, how do I make this into something other than character jumps, character lands on other character is dead, you continue moving. And there's so many little aspects to that. Let's just talk about where I'm at with my development now. I think I've kind of said what I have to say about In Other Waters. I'm excited about it. I hope you give it a shot. It's a really cool game. And I think there's a lot to learn from it. It's pretty cheap too. Like you're not busting out like $60, right? Like it's a reasonably priced indie game. I think it's like 15 when it's not on sale. Okay. I'm gonna talk about my own development a little bit. I've been working on this 2D platformer, like I mentioned. I'm keeping it minimal, right? And the thing that I'm running into right now is, how many different things can I do with the simplest of enemies? This is what I'm exploring right now. I have like 3 enemies. I want you to imagine one of them as a Goomba, just for the sake of discussion and to not get into like in-depths with all this. Goomba from Mario, just the little dude you jump on. Imagine one of them as that. I am trying to figure out how I can make a bunch of interesting levels using just your character, a Goomba, or multiple Goombas, and the layout of the level. And that is such a cool design challenge, because you start realizing how much depth there is to this stuff. When you start trying to make an interesting level out of nothing but Goombas and like platform positioning, oh man, you start to learn how much you really don't know about level design. And that is what I'm learning right now. I'm like, oh man, there's a lot to learn here. So what I'm doing is I'm doing 10 levels with that essentially Goomba only. I have a couple variations on it because I quickly learned that like I want to have a little bit more variation. So like imagine, oh, there's a really big Goomba now, or oh, there's one that moves faster. It's that sort of a thing. So I've got that, and then I'm going to do 10 levels with a different enemy and then 10 levels with another one. That one is going to be weird. So I have an enemy that's it's basically a platform. Like the enemy is not something you kill, right? It's just think of it as an NPC, as a little floating happy little platform that you can jump on, jump off of, and so on. That one I don't think I can actually make into levels on its own, but I'm gonna try anyway, because I think that's gonna force me to explore like the mechanic of the actual platforming. And it's weird that I'm making this game. I wanna talk about this. I want to address this really quickly. I don't really typically go in on platformers. Like, one of the first games that I played as a kid was Sonic, and God, I died so many times. I was very young, so it was frustrating for me. I was terrible at Sonic. And then I just remember like years of like playing Sonic and being terrible at it, just like vaguely, right? Playing it with my brothers. I feel like I like never got past like the second or third level. And I've always found a lot of things about platformers really frustrating. I hate falling into holes and dying. I think it doesn't feel good. I think it's annoying. I don't like it, but that's just because I grew up not liking it. So now the fact that I'm working on a platformer is really weird. Honestly, I started it because I just like had an idea for it, and I was like, oh, whatever, I'll play around with that. And it was like an art thing, actually. I started making a little character and like doing animations, and I was like, this looks like it belongs in a platformer. So then I started making a platformer, and then now here I am, spending a lot of time working on a platformer, even though traditionally they're not what I go in on. Having said that, I have played a lot more platformers in the last like 3 to 4 years than I have in the rest of my life. I played the first of the Ori games. I played around with Super Meat Boy. That was a long time ago. I beat Celeste, which is amazing. What a good game. And yes, I am bragging. That game was hard for me. That game was very difficult for me. Like not an easy game. What else? Like, I'm about to start playing Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I don't remember what other platformers I played, but I feel like I played around with Dust Force at one point, which is like a kind of a speedrunner platformer. I've been getting into it. I've been exploring them a little bit more. And and like Braid, of course. The point is, like, I've grown to appreciate that. Oh, Hollow Knight, jeez. I mean, it's Metroidvania, but I've only put a few hours into that. I can't wait to actually play Hollow Knight. That's going to be great. We're probably going to be talking about that on here. Anyway, there's my little like mini list of platformers, but I think making one is gonna give me a new appreciation for the genre, because the amount of stuff that goes in, like the amount of thought that goes into every small decision on a platformer is crazy. I went on a long walk with somebody and was just discussing for like an hour like these little details, like, are you moving to the left or the right? Are you going up or down? Generally speaking, because if a platformer mostly travels upward, that's a very specific feeling. If you're mostly traveling downward, that's a very specific feeling. The gameplay on that's going to be totally different. If you're going to the left, it's going to be like off-putting and weird. If you're going to the right, it's going to be like kind of standard. So, and then everything in between, like there's a feeling to a platformer where you are ascending. And I don't just mean like a weird metaphorical kind of thing. I mean, that's part of it too, I guess, but mostly what I mean is the gameplay is completely different if you are making a platformer where you mostly go up versus a platformer where you mostly go to the right. I think Celeste is a great example of a game, a platformer where you mostly go up. Hollow Knight is something where you go in all directions. So it plays completely differently. And then there's like, is this a game about fighting things? Or is it a game about navigating these platforms without falling? I don't like I don't like how much trouble I have with that second one. But there's so many tiny decisions, and the moment that you sit down and you start trying to actually craft levels, you start realizing how many like tiny little decisions you're making. Like you're like, oh, if I place this block one spot higher, it makes the player control better, if that makes sense. Like it makes this enemy easier to target if I put them here instead of here. And then that's going to make the player feel like they have better control of the game. There's a lot of just the most minor things that I'm starting to figure out. And then as far as the actual coding side of things go, I have gone full spaghetti pretty early on. So I'm trying to like finish this project before it just becomes this horrific spider web that I end up getting trapped in and dying in. Like I really I really don't want the spaghetti to get too far out of control. I don't think it will, cuz like, oh god, famous last words. Why did I say that? I think I'm going to wrap up this project before it has the chance to become giant. I want it to be, I feel like, a 1 or 2 month project. I'm recording this episode in in January, early January. I would love to have a this is going to come back to haunt me. I would love to have a finished playable version of this game that I can like send to people by the end of February. That would be amazing. I'm committing a lot of time to it right now. I'm not trying to make a full-on game with this. I am trying to make a nice, small, little tight experience. I said that, and then I realized, like, I gotta do all the music. I've got to do all the sound effects. I've got to do all this stuff that still needs implemented. But you know what? What's funny is this episode is probably not even going to be posted until like early to late February, just because of like where I'm at. Maybe even March. Who knows? This will be interesting to find out too. So we'll see if I get the game up either on itch or maybe even like a little free thing on Steam. But I do hold myself to a higher standard if I'm going to release it on Steam, if I'm being honest. But I think that would be a really useful process to go through, is like trying to put together a trailer and put together a Steam page and all this stuff that I don't know how to do. I think that would be really useful to do. Anyway, that is where I'm at with development. Thanks for listening to me ramble about that little adventure. And we're going to go to the very last segment of this episode. All right, it is time for the part of the show where I remind myself of something that I want to be doing regularly and pretend that I am telling it to you as advice. This is the repeat section. The repeatable bit of advice for myself this week is, I think, consistency, patience, and optimism. I realize that's like a lot of words, but I think after having taken a break from recording and having to take a break from a lot of my development for my own reasons, I think it's good to remind myself that consistency is huge. Keeping an optimistic perspective lets me see where opportunities lie, and that's huge. That's gigantic. It's so useful. And wait, what was the other one? See, I've already forgotten. Consistency, optimism, and patience. Jeez, yeah, no wonder I forgot. That's the one I struggle with the most. I think it is hard to be patient. And I think it's also kind of required for something like creating a game on your own, which is what I'm kind of trying to do. Like, that's that's not a quick project. I don't just like pop in on a weekend and go, hey, game's done. Spent 16 hours on it. Now it's finished. Full-fledged game. Here you go, world. Check it out. Give me 50 cents. Like, no. It's gonna take a lot of patience. And I think patience in action is not just telling myself, oh, be patient. That's more, I don't know what that is, but I don't like it. Active patience, I think, is not forcing myself to work myself to death in a week, making room for other things in my life, making sure that game development does not take over everything is part of being patient. I think the reason that we spend every single waking hour working on the game is because we're like, I've got to get it finished. It's a symptom of being impatient. It's like, I have to do it now, or I'm gonna I need it done. And I think there's a point where you should start pushing pretty hard, I guess, but it's definitely not this early on in the project. And I just want to make sure to remind myself that a part of patience is going out on a hike on a Saturday, right? A part of patience is just giving yourself some room to breathe. As long as you are still being consistent about the project, right? Yeah, I think that's maybe the best reminder for myself this week. Okay, hopefully y'all got some value out of this episode. I will see you next time. Have a good week. Create some cool stuff and take your time with it. Have a good one.